Καλησπέρα σας. Χαιρόμαστε πάρα πολύ που είμαστε εδώ και εγώ και ο συγγραφέας, φαντάζομαι, ο Ίλια Λέοναρντ Πφέιφερ, με τον οποίο θα συζητήσουμε για το μυθιστόρημά του Grand Hotel Europa, που κυκλοφορεί από τις εκδόσεις Ίκαρος, σε μετάφραση της Μαργαρίτας Μπονάτσου. Είμαι ο Γρηγόρης Μπέκος, δημοσιογράφος, και θα ήθελα να δώσω πρώτα το λόγο στον συγγραφέα για να μας πει έτσι να μας καλησπερίσει και να μας πει σε αδρές γραμμές λίγο πολύ πώς σχετίζεται με την Ελλάδα ή αν έχει επισκεφτεί ξανά την Κρήτη ή την Ελλάδα γενικώς, και θα προχωρήσουμε.
This is not working.
It's not working.
No.
So
Έχουμε ένα θέμα με τη διερμηνία, δεν άκουσε. So the question was... Όχι. Έρχεται η κυρία Μπεϊόγλου να βοηθήσει την κατάσταση.
Εγώ δεν θα κάνω τίποτα.
Ωραία, αυτό είναι για τα ελληνικά.
Είμαστε η πρώτη εκδήλωση, οπότε συμβαίνουν αυτά τα τεχνικά, ξέρετε. Όχι, δεν θα το χρειαστώ. Ευχαριστούμε. We can now check. And you hear the interpreter, okay?
I can hear now, yes.
So, η ερώτηση δεν ήταν ερώτηση. Το πρώτο ήταν ότι δίνω το λόγο στον συγγραφέα να μας καλησπερίσει και να μας πει σε αδρές γραμμές πώς σχετίζεται με την Ελλάδα. Αν έχει ξανάρθει στη χώρα και με ποιους άλλους τρόπους σχετίζεται με τον ελληνικό πολιτισμό ή την Ελλάδα.
Χαίρομαι πολύ που βρίσκομαι εδώ. Έχω ελληνική ψυχή. Είμαι ελληνικό στην καρδιά μου. So it's a great pleasure to be here στα όμορφα Χανιά, and I'm very honored to be invited here. It's the first time that I'm on an official mission in Greece, and I'm very honored to be so. But it's by no means the first time that I've been to Greece. Actually, I studied ancient Greek language and culture for many years at the University of Leiden in Holland. And of course, already in that period, I came to Greece very often, and I've always felt very much at home here. So it's really a great pleasure for me to be here.
Τώρα ακούσατε και όχι μόνο μίλησε ελληνικά, και μίλησε και πολύ σωστά, αυτό που λένε well pronounced και έξω. Θέλω να ξεκινήσω. Αυτό το βιβλίο είναι αυτό το βιβλίο εδώ, το Grand Hotel Europa. Είναι ένα βιβλίο πολυσέλιδο, όπως ίσως είδατε, αλλά κατά την προσωπική μου άποψη ένα συναρπαστικό ανάγνωσμα για πολλούς λόγους. Διαβάζοντάς το, ειδικά τώρα μετά τα αποτελέσματα των ευρωεκλογών, σε κάνει να σκέφτεσαι ότι μια τέτοια διαχείριση, ας πούμε, που αφορά την Ευρώπη σε πολύ μεγάλο βαθμό, από τη μεριά της λογοτεχνίας έχει πάρα πολύ μεγάλη αξία. Δεν θα είναι πολιτική ερώτηση, θα είναι λογοτεχνική ερώτηση, και θα ήθελα απλώς, Ήλια, να μας πεις πώς άρχισε να γράφεται αυτό το βιβλίο, πώς προέκυψε.
Thank you for your kind words about the book. Actually, to answer your question, I have to tell that I'm a Dutch author. I'm from the Netherlands, but since some time I've been living in Italy, in the city of Genoa. It was in the summer of 2008 that I ended up in Genoa. It was all by coincidence. I ended up journey there, and I had by no means the idea of moving there permanently or anything spectacular like that. But by the lack of a better word, I just fell in love with the city, and I thought it would be a good idea to stay there just for a little bit. So I rented a little apartment in Genoa for 2 months, and I thought, well, after that I will go back to the Netherlands. But then I prolonged it, and I prolonged it again, and now it's been 15 years that I've been living there. And this moving from the Netherlands to Italy, of course, had a couple of effects on me. It would be strange if it were not like that. First of all, I noticed that gradually, perhaps, I became a little bit less Dutch, which is only a very good thing for a person. I noticed that I became a little bit more Italian, which is also a very happy consequence. But most importantly, I noticed that I started feeling more European. And it was for some time that I was wondering, what does that mean? What does it mean to feel European? What could a European identity be? And it is from this personal question that the novel Grand Hotel Europa is born. And when you start thinking about that question, what a European identity could entail, perhaps you don't even have to think for that long before arriving at the conclusion that it has a lot to do with our relationship with the past. In Europe, the past is everywhere. We live our lives surrounded by tangible remains of the past, in Greece more so than anywhere else. And all this past that surrounds us, of course, those are our riches. We feel very good about it, we are proud about it, we like it. But perhaps there's also another side to it. Because whoever lives his life surrounded by glorious remains of glorious centuries from the past, sooner or later may be tempted to conclude that the best times are behind us, that we have seen better times in the past. And this nostalgia, this nostalgia for a better past, paradoxically, is also a constant factor in European culture. We've always thought that. We always thought that the past was better. Even the ancient Greeks, while they were still busy forming our Western civilization, thought that the golden age was in the past when the gods were still walking on the earth. So a novel about European identity should be, for me, also a novel very much about the relationship with the past and nostalgia. And then, when you start thinking like this, of course you cannot escape the conclusion that there are also some objective arguments for the conclusion that Europe has seen better times in the past. For instance, geopolitically, this is evidently the case. The times when the countries of Europe roamed the 7 seas of the earth and thoughtlessly subjected the continents to their will are definitely behind us. And it's definitely better like this, don't get me wrong. But this means that Europe as a continent arrived in a point in history where geopolitically it has to redefine itself. It has to redefine its position between falling and rising world powers. And of course, this is exactly what we're trying to do with this painstakingly slow, beautiful, and highly necessary process of European unification. But then also, economically, perhaps, Europe has seen better times in the past. And this is something that is perhaps more visible in the south of Europe than in the north. I noticed it very much in Italy, where I live now. And what you see in Italy is that it's actually more and more difficult for a country like Italy to maintain a good old-fashioned economy based on industry, shipbuilding, all that kind of things that they've done for decades. That doesn't make sense anymore because the rising economies at the East do it better and cheaper. So also economically, Europe reached a point in history where it has to redefine itself. And what you see then as an alternative economy, as an alternative means of making money, and again, this is something that is more visible in the south than in the north, we turn to this main characteristic of our European identity, which is the omnipresence of our tangible past. Mm-hmm. And this is something you can sell. You can sell your past. You can sell tickets for your monuments, for your museums. And this, of course, brings tourism. And that is the reason why I couldn't avoid talking about tourism. I think it's a very distinctive characteristic of Europe today, and especially for the south of Europe.
Πριν ρωτήσω για τον μαζικό τουρισμό, που όντως είναι ένας βασικός προβληματισμός που υπάρχει στο βιβλίο, θέλω να επιμείνω λίγο στο ζήτημα της νοσταλγίας. Η νοσταλγία είναι ένα πράγμα που ο καθένας μπορεί να το βλέπει αλλιώς. Θέλω να πω, κατά τη γνώμη μου, ακόμα και σε ένα κοινωνικό επίπεδο ή σε ένα πολιτικό επίπεδο, υπάρχει μια νοσταλγία που είναι θετική κατά κάποιο τρόπο, για να το πω καταχρηστικά, και υπάρχει και μια νοσταλγία που είναι τελείως αρνητική. Παραδείγματος χάρη, πολλά από τα κόμματα της σύγχρονης ακροδεξιάς στην Ευρώπη είναι νοσταλγικά από αυτή την άποψη. Δηλαδή λένε για τις παλιές καλές εποχές που είχαμε χρήματα ή που δεν είχαμε τόσους ξένους κλπ. Δηλαδή υπάρχει ένας προβληματισμός τι την κάνουμε την νοσταλγία τελικά. Συμφωνείς αυτό? Δεν ξέρω.
Yes. Well, I think we are very susceptible to this sense of nostalgia for reasons I said before. No? It is in our blood to be nostalgic. And there is, of course, a dangerous side to this because this nostalgia can be exploited politically. And that is exactly what many right-wing parties and extreme right-wing parties in all the countries of Europe are doing. Because the extreme right is, in the core, a nostalgic movement. They promise to solve all our problems by turning back the times to a period in which these problems didn't exist. And this period is perhaps even fictional. They promise to bring us back to the promised land of the past that perhaps never was and never existed. And this is, of course, a trap. And it's easy for us to fall in this trap because we are already nostalgic from ourselves, no? Mm-hmm. But of course, when you have the idea that everything that spoke for itself in its past is no longer valid, that we reached a new point in history. Of course, this can also be unsettling, but the answer can never be turning back to the past. You have to see this as a challenge to redefine your position, as I said before. Mm-hmm. And politically, this is it's difficult nowadays that this is not the fashion in Europe. The fashion is to turn your back on the future and to long for a past, a mythical past that has never existed.
Because you, επειδή ο συγγραφέας είναι σε μια προνομιακή θέση, ζώντας στην Ιταλία τα τελευταία 15 χρόνια, δηλαδή με έναν τρόπο είναι και, μπορεί να τη δει και από μέσα και με το εξωτερικό μάτι, με το μάτι του εξωτερικού παρατηρητή, αναρωτιέμαι πώς, ας πούμε, αυτό που συζητάμε για την νοσταλγία το μπορεί να το χρησιμοποιεί η Μελώνη, που τώρα, ας πούμε, είναι στην εξουσία στην Ιταλία. Αν υπάρχει κάποιο πολύ χαρακτηριστικό παράδειγμα ή πώς συμπεριφέρεται σε σχέση με την νοσταλγία.
Well, thank you for mentioning our Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. This in itself could be a subject for 2 hours of discussion, but then it can also be done very quickly. Italy is governed now by a Prime Minister who comes from a party with roots in fascism. Even the logo of the political party is a fascistic logo. And so this is in itself, of course, double nostalgia, because the historical fascism was in itself a nostalgic movement, longing back for the greatness of the Roman Empire, for instance. No? And now we have a prime minister who is a neo-fascist. So she is longing for the time of historical fascism, which in itself was nostalgic. So yes, no, actually, it's very interesting, if not to say unsettling, to live in Italy nowadays, because Giorgia Meloni is a prime minister who, in the beginning, seemed to be very moderate, seemed to have changed under the weight of the responsibility, seems also abroad in the European context, he seems a very constructive ally, in spite of earlier points of views. She's unambiguously supporting the Ukraine, for instance. She's, in spite of earlier views, she's supporting the European unification and that kind of thing. So it's easily to be fooled. But it becomes clearer and clearer that she is gradually, step by step, following an agenda to dismantle the democratic state of rights in Italy. She's following the agenda of our big friend and example, Viktor Orban. And the very first thing she did was limiting the freedom of press in all many ways. She's now attacking the independence of the juridical system. She's proposing a reform of the constitution that gives the prime minister almost supreme power. By coincidence, she is the prime minister, and so on and so forth. But what I find very disturbing, actually, living in Italy, is that I notice that it's very easy not to be disturbed by this. It's very easy not even to know, because life goes on. It's beautiful. The sun is shining. The pasta alla carbonara is as good as ever. And this process of dismantling the democracy and the state of rights is very slow. It's step by step, and every single step in itself, perhaps, is not reason for big outrage. But when you add up all the steps by itself, it is really an attack on democracy itself. And this is actually a process that interests me and that worries me very much, because of course Italy is by no means unique in this respect. Also in my other home country, in the Netherlands, I'm not sure you follow Dutch politics very closely. I can recommend not to. Recently, we have the extreme right-wing party winning the elections, and we have an extreme right-wing government now in the Netherlands. The same thing could happen in France during next weekend, and these developments are of course very concerning. And it's actually, this is not what our conversation is about, but perhaps I can hardly avoid mentioning it. This idea that democracy can bring forth a dictatorship, that democracy can crumble under itself, is really something that concerns me very much. And that is the reason why I decided to write my most recent novel, the novel that came after this one, which is not available yet in any other language. It came out in Dutch just last year, which is a historical novel on the ancient Greek hero Alcibiades. And actually it was an old plan writing about Alcibiades. When I was studying ancient Greek, I encountered him. Of course, he was somebody everybody talked about. So he left his traces in the sources. So you meet Alcibiades when you read Plato, you read Thucydides, when you read Xenophon, and so forth. And already in that time, he fascinated me enormously. He's such an incredible character who led such an incredible life that already then I thought that it would be worth my while writing a historical novel about him. But then I didn't do it. I think I didn't dare to do it for a long time. And the reason why I took up this old plan about 2 years ago, and I took up the courage to write this historical novel about Alcibiades, was exactly that I realized that he was living in a period in which at the second half of the 5th century BC in Athens, when the first democracy, the democracy that is the inspiration of all our modern democracy, the Athenian democracy, went into decay. And Alcibiades was very much engaged with that. He was a protagonist in this period, and he was perhaps even to a certain amount guilty of this process of decay. And when you look at the symptoms which at that time pointed at the decay of democracy, for us nowadays, they are scaringly recognizable. And it's actually many of these symptoms are symptoms of what we nowadays would call populism. So that is why I wrote this historical novel that hopefully one day will also be available in Greek. And it was actually shocking. When I was writing the novel, right in the beginning, I made a choice to have Alcibiades tell his own story in the first person. So as a consequence, of course, it would be very unnatural if he reflects on our modern time. No, so that took away that possibility of referring explicitly to today. But it was not necessary at all. The parallels are so obvious and so scary. So, yeah.
Θέλω να προσθέσω απλώς ότι αυτό το βιβλίο στο οποίο αναφέρεται ο συγγραφέας είναι επίσης πολυσέλιδο. Κυκλοφόρησε το 2023 στην Ολλανδία. Αναρωτιέμαι όμως, συμφωνώ για τους παραλληλισμούς και έτσι εργάζονται οι συγγραφείς. Πρέπει όμως να υπήρχε κάτι στον Αλκιβιάδη, τον ίδιο, που σας κινητοποίησε. Κάτι που, ας πούμε, ο Αλκιβιάδης ήταν, θα λέγαμε, και ένα celebrity της εποχής. Έτσι. Υπήρχε κάτι σε αυτόν τον τύπο που σας εξώθησε να αφιερώσετε χρόνια και τόσες πολλές σελίδες αυτόν? Ή τι ήταν αυτό το ιδιαίτερο? Γιατί αυτόν και όχι κάποιον άλλον, εν τέλει?
Well, of course, he's a very interesting character who lived an incredible life. Born in Athens and the architect of the big expedition to conquer Sicily, then being called back, fleeing to Sparta. He also stayed as an advisor in Sardis in the Persian Empire, came back to Athens, almost single-handedly won the war, but then lost the war. Well, it is really, it's a wonderful story, incredible story, and all by itself it becomes a Netflix series. So that is one thing that attracted me to him. But then he, as a character, is also, I liked very much, I still like very much the ambiguity of him as a character. But the first thing that everybody says about Alcibiades, all the sources agree about that, is that he was a beautiful man, the most beautiful man of Greece. But this beauty was ambiguous because he was not so manly for a beautiful man. He was an androgyne character. And the second thing everybody says about Alcibiades, and the second thing that everybody agrees on, is that he was incredibly ambitious. But also his ambition is ambiguous, because during his whole life, the question is exactly if his ambition was mainly for himself or for the city that he said to serve. And this ambiguity makes him a very interesting literary character. Of course, it makes him also very interesting if you let him tell his own story in the first person, because there is a lot he has to account for, and he is perhaps not the most reliable narrator. So that makes it very interesting. And the other thing that interests me about Alcibiades is that in the end, if you think about it, he's a tragic character. Because at the end of his life, when he has this incredible last plan to save Athens with the help of the king of Persia, if this last plan fails, and it will fail, he will have reached nothing in his life. He left empty-handed. And that makes him tragic. I think Alcibiades has been compared often to Alexander the Great. And I think that this comparison is justified in any case for ambition, and perhaps also for qualities. But Alcibiades is a kind of Alexander the Great with bad luck. And that makes him interesting. And it is interesting that you can also locate this bad luck. And this bad luck is for the major part located in the decaying democratic system to which he had to subject his ambition. And that makes it interesting. Yeah, I really loved working on this book. I'm still full of it. It is my most recent book, but it is also, for me, it was also going back to my first love, which was ancient Greece. So it's very rewarding for me to use my talents that I could develop as a writer now to share my first love with my readers. Yeah, it's a bit strange talking about a book that's not yet available in Greece, but then again, we are in Greece talking about Alcibiades, so perhaps it is justified.
Αντιθέτως, εγώ πιστεύω ότι είναι πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον που μιλάμε και για τον Αλκιβιάδη και αν έχουμε χρόνο έχω σκοπό να ρωτήσω και για το άλλο βιβλίο που προηγήθηκε αυτού, εδώ που είναι μεταφρασμένο στα ελληνικά, που είναι ένα βιβλίο που λέγεται, ένα μυθιστόρημα που λέγεται La Superba. Θα μείνω όμως λίγο σε αυτό το μυθιστόρημα για να δώσω κάποιες εξηγήσεις σε αδρές γραμμές. Τι συμβαίνει εδώ? Έχουμε ένα ξενοδοχείο πολυτελές, αλλά σε παρακμή, κάπου στην Ευρώπη, δεν προσδιορίζεται, στο οποίο θα λέγαμε μια συμπίκνωση του μεγάλου ευρωπαϊκού παρελθόντος, αυτό το ξενοδοχείο, το οποίο έχει περάσει εσχάτως στα χέρια ενός Κινέζου μεγαλοεπιχειρηματία, του κυρίου Wang. Εκεί λοιπόν καταλύει ο πρωταγωνιστής και αφηγητής αυτού του μυθιστορήματος, που είναι επίσης συγγραφέας, σαν τον συγγραφέα μας εδώ, και πηγαίνει εκεί με σκοπό να επουλώσει τις πληγές του από έναν χωρισμό με μια γυναίκα, με την Κλείο, που είναι Ιταλίδα και είναι ιστορικός τέχνης. Άρα οι δύο βασικοί άξονες είναι αυτοί. Και ήθελα να ρωτήσω, να επισημάνω επίσης κάτι πάρα πολύ ωραίο που συνδέεται με την Κρήτη, ότι ο πρώτος άνθρωπος που συναντά ο χαρακτήρας αυτό το μυθιστόρημα είναι ένας επιχειρηματίας από την Κρήτη, ο οποίος λέει στο συγγραφέα ότι κοίταξε να δεις, ο ευρωπαϊκός πολιτισμός ξεκίνησε από εκεί και ασχολείται με την ναυτιλία και είναι και αυτός ένα παράδειγμα του πώς δεν βλέπει την Ευρώπη, αλλά κοιτάει προς άλλες αναδυόμενες οικονομίες για να κάνει τις δουλειές του άνθρωπου. Ήθελα να ρωτήσω, τελικά, αφού έκανα αυτές τις εξηγήσεις σε σχέση με την πλοκή και τους άξονες του βιβλίου, αν μέσα σε αυτό το βιβλίο ο συγγραφέας κυνηγάει, θέλει να οικειοποιηθεί δύο πράγματα ταυτόχρονα. Αφενός έναν έρωτα που δεν ευωδόθηκε, αφετέρου ένα παρελθόν, μια θετική νοσταλγία για τη γυραιά Ήπειρο, ας πούμε, για την Ευρώπη, που φαίνεται ότι κάπως μας φεύγει από τα χέρια. Ήταν αυτός ο στόχος στην αρχή της συγγραφής αυτού του βιβλίου, αυτά τα δύο πράγματα να πάνε μαζί μέχρι τέλους?
Yes, thank you. That's a very adequate picture, very adequate summary. The protagonist of Grand Hotel Europa has a very improbable name. He's called Ίλια Λέοναρντ Πφέιφερ. He is perhaps a bit similar to me, but he is not me. He's perhaps an exaggerated version of me. And he is, we meet him at the beginning when he is checking in this hotel, Grand Hotel Europa, in an unspecified place, as you say correctly. And he is checking in there for indefinite time because he wants to rethink and rework the love of his life. And being a writer, he does that on paper. So he's writing what happened from the beginning when he met Cleo to the end. Also in the beginning, already in the beginning, we know that it ended badly. So he's looking back, trying to reconstruct this love story. And we are looking over his shoulder while he's doing that. It's really, we have to underline this and emphasize this. It's a very moving love story because this helps the sales of the book. And this, of course, he is there in this hotel to be quiet, alone, and have the time to rethink all this. But of course, this hotel doesn't agree and is intervening, so all kinds of things start to happen there also. So it is in alternating chapters. We see what is happening in the hotel, and then we have a chapter when he's looking back on his relationship with Cleo. This relationship with Cleo is an art historian, and she's specialized in the works of Caravaggio. And part of the flashback, part of the reconstruction of this love story is their voyages, the journeys they undertook to look for the last picture of Caravaggio. And this is actually a real mystery. This is not something I made up. There is a real mystery with the last painting of Caravaggio. Perhaps it's too much to tell it all in detail, but okay. There's this, and they are looking for it. Mm-hmm. And actually, when he's looking back on this entire love story, he realizes that the moment in which they were most happy was actually when they were on expedition trying to find the last painting of Caravaggio and trying to solve a murder mystery from the year 1610. So it's actually already during their love life, they lived in the past. So it's very much related to the past. And then in the hotel, it's the Grand Hotel Europa is really a grand hotel as you would like it to be. It's really grandiose, beautiful, but also a bit decayed. It has seen better times in the past. And there are hardly any customers anymore. There are some strange, semi-permanent inhabitants, and that is, of course, the ones he's meeting in this decayed hotel that is also beautiful for its decay. But then, right in the beginning, Signor Wang from China enters the stage. He has bought the hotel and he wants to give it a new life. And with the best of intentions, he is trying to make it more European, but more European to Chinese taste. So it is a very strange paradox where Mr. Wang is, for instance, taking away an old painting, which is a portrait, a dark, ugly portrait of Paganini, and instead he puts a nice photo of the Eiffel Tower. There is the beautiful 19th century Chinese room in the hotel, according to the fashion in Europe and in that time. But for Mr. Wang, this is not European enough, so he changes the Chinese room into an English pub, and that kind of things, you know. All with the best of intentions, and then it works. Then, in the end, more and more guests arrive, and he revived Grand Hotel Europe, but also like making a parody of its real character. And of course, this hotel is called Europa, Europe, because it wants to be a metaphor for the old continent.
Από όσο κατάλαβα, δηλαδή, έχουμε μια πολύ συγκινητική ιστορία που αφορά τον χαρακτήρα και την Κλείο, την ιστορικό τέχνης. Υπάρχει ένα απόσπασμα στην αρχή του βιβλίου που η Κλείο περιγράφει στον Ολλανδό συγγραφέα χαρακτήρα σύντροφό της πώς λειτουργεί το ιταλικό σύστημα, πώς λειτουργεί η ιταλική οικονομία, η ιταλική κοινωνία, και είναι εντυπωσιακής ακρίβειας το πώς ο συγγραφέας περιγράφει το πώς λειτουργεί αυτό το μεσογειακό, αυτή η μεσογειακή συνθήκη. Πώς, τι ρόλο έχει η οικογένεια, τι ρόλο έχουν διάφορες φατρίες κτλ. Είναι πραγματικά εντυπωσιακό και μέσα στο βιβλίο. Άρα έχουμε μια ερωτική ιστορία και έχουμε και ένα, αν συμφωνεί ο Ίλια Λέοναρντ Πφέιφερ, ένα ερωτικό γράμμα προς την Ευρώπη. Και ενδεχομένως μια Ευρώπη που μάλλον δεν μπορεί πια να είναι αυτό που ήταν ενδεχομένως. Δηλαδή, ίσως έχουμε περάσει μια κόκκινη γραμμή πια, η παγκοσμιοποίηση ίσως έχει κάνει πολύ πιο δύσκολο για την Ευρώπη να διατηρήσει ίσως τη φυσιογνωμία της.
Yes, no, you're totally right. That is what's happening. About this portrait of Italian societies, I'm glad. Perhaps I must say that I'm not glad that you recognize it so well. But actually, this was.
That happens.
when I first came to Italy and when I decided to stay there, I didn't have the idea that I was going to live in a totally different society. I thought, well, it is from Amsterdam to Genoa is slightly more than 1,000 kilometers. It's still Europe. Genoa is northern Italy. It isn't even the south. So how different can it be? I was assuming that it was totally recognizable for me. And in the beginning it was. But it takes some time to see the differences. And the longer I am there, and it's a process that is even going on now, the more and more I realize how big the differences are. But you have to dig deeper for that. And more and more I realize that the Italian system of doing things is really very different from the Dutch system. And I also had to learn that it's not inferior or superior. It's just different. It's a system that also works. Even if from a Dutch perspective it's very strange and even corrupt and nepotism and that kind of thing. Yeah. So that was a very interesting lesson for me. And it also made me think about what we're trying to achieve from all our traveling. When we're visiting all the foreign countries we visit, we bravely put on our shorts and go to the beaches of Thailand and Brazil. But what are we thinking to understand? For me, moving 1,000 kilometers and understanding the difference took many, many years. So it is much more interesting to travel vertically, staying at the same place, which is a new concept I'm introducing now, traveling vertically. But you asked something else.
No, με καλύψατε πλήρως. Θέλω να σταθώ, επειδή περνάει ο χρόνος σιγά σιγά, θέλω να σταθώ σε κάτι άλλο σε σχέση με το βιβλίο, το μυθιστόρημα. Ένας πολύ μεγάλος προβληματισμός μέσα σε αυτό το βιβλίο είναι ο μαζικός τουρισμός. Δηλαδή, βλέπουμε ότι ο τουρισμός απλά δεν έχει να κάνει με ανθρώπους που πάρα πολύ πρόσχαροι πάνε σε κάποια άλλη χώρα να περάσουν ωραία κάποιες μέρες. Βλέπουμε ότι ο τουρισμός, οι πράγματα που συνδέονται με αυτόν, όπως ας πούμε το Airbnb, δημιουργούν κοινωνικά προβλήματα σε χώρες, επηρεάζουν τις δομές των πόλεων τους. Και εδώ ο Ίλια Λέοναρντ Πφέιφερ έχει χρησιμοποιήσει ένα πάρα πολύ εμβληματικό παράδειγμα αυτής της μεταμόρφωσης, μετεξέλιξης, που είναι η πόλη της Βενετίας. Είναι πολύ εμβληματικό αυτό το παράδειγμα. Για το πώς μπορεί να είναι, αυτή είναι η ερώτηση, πώς μπορεί να είναι στο μέλλον όλη η Ευρώπη.
Yes, thank you. Well, a great part of the story, of the love story, is set in Venice, and this is of course no coincidence. Venice is perhaps the most dramatic and the most convincing example of a city that totally, irreversibly surrendered itself to mass tourism. And to an extent that Venice isn't even a real city anymore. Because nobody is living there anymore. In the 14th century, if I remember correctly, Venice had 200,000 inhabitants. In the 14th century. Nowadays, in the 21st century, there are less than 50,000 left. And the number is declining every day. And this city with less than 50,000 inhabitants is visited by more than 20 million tourists a year. So this is a total, this is not a city anymore. This is a historical theme park. Actually, recently they also introduced an entrance fee. You have to pay a ticket to go into Venice. Yeah. And of course, Venice is a very extreme example, but it is by no means unique. We see exactly the same mechanisms in other European cities. We see it also in Amsterdam, in Barcelona, in Italian cities like Florence and Rome and others. And of course, we also see it here in Greece. Yeah. And the mechanisms are always the same. It's that as soon as a city starts to enjoy the attention of tourists, there are a couple of developments which are inarrestable, that more and more facilities that were for the residents take place, have to go away to make place for facilities for tourists. It's more and more difficult to find housing, especially in the center. The prices of houses go to the roof because there are too many investors who are interested to buy. And people who are living in the historical center see themselves confronted with more and more nuisance, and at the same time they see the prices of the houses rise, so it's very attractive to sell and go and live somewhere else. And this is the way in which a historical center empties itself. And you see the same thing happening everywhere. Then, of course, you can say that tourism brings in money. And to a certain extent, it's true. But we have to realize that the money made by tourism is especially money made by private parties that more often than not are also in foreign hands. For instance, in Amsterdam, all the boats in the canals and the museums like Madame Tussauds and many of the big hotels are owned by American investors and that kind of thing. So, and actually from the public point of view, tourism costs money. The city has to pay for investments, for perhaps a new bus stop station or a pier for cruise ships and that kind of thing. But more importantly, also for cleaning the streets, for medical care, for police officers who have to find back all the lost passports and that kind of thing. I think in Amsterdam, there's every 20 minutes, there's an ambulance riding out for a tourist. So this is all a cost, of course, for the public case. And there are calculations in the city, very detailed calculations for the city of Amsterdam, which demonstrate that actually the city, the public, the taxpayer, pays money for the privilege to host tourists. And that's the earnings from that go to private parties. Mm-hmm. And then, more importantly, that's what you said in your question, an effect of tourism is a very dramatic change of the social infrastructure of the cities. And this is a big effect of B&B. And, okay, so it could be that we want this. Mm-hmm. It could be a choice, no? It could be that we choose that Europe should be the garden of the world, that we receive and entertain the productive part of the world. This can be a choice. And if we choose that, we can actually also be very good at it, especially in Greece. But if we don't want it, if we see another future for ourselves, we have to act now. Because if we leave it to the laws of the free market, the process is unstoppable. And then, of course, there is a point where it's too late to turn back. And Venice is an obvious example, no? Suppose that tomorrow we decide we made a big mistake here. We don't want Venice to be a theme park, a touristic place. We want it to be a real city again. How would you do that? That is impossible because nobody is living there anymore. So there is a point of no return. So I would very much like to contribute to this debate to make people aware that tourism also has a downside, that it comes with a cost, and that we must think about it if we want it. And it's important to think about it, because if we don't think about it, we will have it.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ τον Ίλια Λέοναρντ Πφέιφερ για τη συζήτηση αυτή. Πρέπει να σταματήσουμε εδώ, γιατί σας είδα που μου κάνατε το νόημα, ευτυχώς. Ήταν, νομίζω, πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα η κουβέντα και αποδείχθηκε ότι όταν μιλάμε για το, ή τέλος πάντων καλούμαστε να μιλήσουμε για το παρελθόν, δεν μιλάμε πάντα και τόσο πολύ για το παρελθόν, αλλά για πράγματα που μας αφορούν αυτή τη στιγμή που μιλάμε. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ τον συγγραφέα.